Hey everyone, welcome back to Data Driven Health Radio. And I have the great privilege today of speaking with Alex Swanson, who is the founder and CEO of Nutrition Genome. And this is an incredibly exciting area of consumer testing. There are multiple applications around the work Alex's company is doing around mental health, around cancer, around disease diagnoses. And it's just going to be a really, really intriguing and fun and exciting conversation. Alex, we got introduced by our mutual colleague, Dr. Nasha Winters, who is doing work with cancer patients using a number of different interventions. Your test is a huge component of her methodology, so she was kind enough to connect us. And I'm really, really grateful for you to be here and really excited to dive into the topic of nutrigenomics and the work that's being done at your company. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Looks like, as I mentioned before we started, you're up in an idyllic little spot there in Bend, Oregon. I can see the trees in the background and the sunlight. I'm up here in Truckee, California. So we're kindred spirits just in terms of the type of environment that we feel brings out our best work.
We both came from the Bay Area as well, right?
Yes,
So,
we
yeah.
did. Rejects from the Bay Area. We had a good run there, and now we're like, I need to zen out for a little while.
Exactly.
My company from a place that can help me rejuvenate as a human being, because these challenges that we collectively take on as entrepreneurs are immense. And I don't know, is that part of how you feel? Is that living up there in Bend is a way just to make sure that you're rejuvenating your spirit and your body, and also giving you the ability to focus? That's how I feel up here in Truckee personally.
Yeah, I think I was looking at it, I want to practice what I preach. And, what we preach is epigenetics. So that's
Yep.
not only your diet, your exercise, but that's your environment.
Yeah.
And your environment plays a huge role in how you feel. I mean, just in terms of physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, all of those things, I think, reflect your environment.
Awesome.
And I wanted to make sure that we were in a place that we felt balanced. My wife and I felt balanced.
Yeah.
If we're going to work really hard, then we should be in a place that actually offsets that too.
100%. That's exactly how I feel. I think every bar, coffee shop, and restaurant in Truckee is pretty much sick of me rolling in with my laptop and then posting up and doing work.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, I feel great. I feel rejuvenated here. I can really, really focus on what I need to do. Anyhow, I digress. I would love it if you can give us an overview on your company, Nutrition Genome. So let's start off and level set here before we build on the conversation.
Sure.
What are you guys working on over there?
So just a background on Nutrition Genome, I had a clinical nutrition practice for 12 years. And my mom's actually a nutritionist. So I'm a second generation nutritionist. And so I grew up in the genes, right? So it's been epigenetically changed for me that this is what I was going to be doing with my life.
Absolutely. I love it.
But over those years, we saw cases just get more and more difficult, more challenging, and
in what
harder
sense?
to kind of crack. The disorders didn't really have any clear pattern. Before, they were a little more clear cut as to what it was. And now there were so many different angles to it, so many different pathways involved, that they became these kind of mystery disorders. Nobody really knew what they had.
Interesting.
And I think it's this combination of, burning the candle at both ends, poor diet, poor environment, just kind of a perfect storm coming together with people. And that's when I started looking towards genetics about 5 years ago. I started checking out these software programs that were looking at genes and showing how these different variants in genes really alter the way you respond to things in your diet, respond to foods in your diet, respond to your environment, to stress. We all respond differently. And it started to make sense of that. And what fascinated me was when I started kind of mapping out the pathways involved in these genes and collecting this database, I was starting to get answers that I couldn't get before. I started having these explanations to these disorders, how they have basically had these patterns throughout the family and how they manifested. And I could give answers to them and then, in a sense, give better solutions.
Concrete, tangible, something you can point at and say, this makes a lot of sense. This is not anecdotal. This is something where we've definitively identified something concrete, whereas there was nothing really to go on before with a lot of these cases.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it allowed you to look at genetics, line up biomarkers, line up family history, and all of a sudden everything fell into place.
Yep.
And you could just point, and people were really excited about the information because they felt like empowered by it. They felt like they finally had answers to things and an understanding that they didn't before. As a lot of them look at their blood work and they don't really know what it means.
Yep.
But when you start understanding it from this biochemical pathway involved in your genes, it all of a sudden starts to click as to, okay, this is why I have a higher need for omega-3s. This is why my vitamin D levels are lower.
That's the next piece of the puzzle. I mean, I'm just looking at my labs today. I work with Dr. Grace Liu. She sent me for my labs, and I'm a total nerd. So I'm like checking the website like every 5 minutes, waiting for like the next little test to show up in my profile. I totally nerd out on that stuff. But I'm looking at labs in isolation. Part of the reason I built Heads Up Health was because I realized that the lifestyle data was missing. So that's what we wanted to do was, okay, what's happening in my lifestyle? Let me put that next to my blood tests. And then the third piece of this puzzle is when you can then line up the genetics, and then you have something incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and it really is a blueprint. That's how I look at genetics, because the DNA is fixed, but the epigenome is flexible. So what that means is essentially when you get a nutrition genome report and you see these gene variants, that's the same from birth on.
Yep.
But the expression changes throughout your life. And if you understand what positively expresses this gene, negatively, you can make decisions based on that information. And you start to see that reflected in the biomarkers, reflected in symptoms, reflected in just how you feel in general.
Yep. So, dumb question here. And so you mentioned the DNA is fixed, but it's the expression that changes in response to different triggers, environmental, lifestyle, etc. So are you within the nutrition genome test, are you measuring both the expression and the genes themselves?
So we can only measure the genes themselves, the actual SNPs as they're called, the gene variants. And then our research looks at those genes and says, this is how this expression is altered or changed. And so if you start seeing these certain things occurring, with your own health, you can see how these genes are being affected.
So what influences the genes, and when you see the SNP and the research tells us what levers we can pull, then you pull on those levers and you look for changes in other areas, lab markers, etc. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, and then you kind of take that and you start looking at all the genes in those pathways. So we make sure we don't isolate one gene, say one gene, one disease, but we look at all of these genes together and how they're working together.
That's incredible. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I understand that correctly, then again, this is noob questions here, but I assume there's a lot of noob listeners. So are there situations with nutrition genome where you would then ever need to do another test?
No, actually. I mean, essentially you do the one test, but what you can do is you start basically monitoring those biomarkers. You start seeing improvements, and then we keep adding new research and new genes.
I understand.
So once you're kind of in the system, you start getting updates, you start understanding on this deeper level.
Yep. Okay, cool. So that would be through the web portal then, presumably, where a lot of the updated information is coming in. So you're you get that one baseline analysis, but what on that baseline continues to grow and expand as more research is done, as the machine learning starts to uncover more areas that were previously unknown. So you continue to derive more value from this one base sample over time.
Yeah. And what we tell people is, this is a book on you.
Yep.
And you want to take your time. You want to go chapter to chapter with it, because we still have people years later saying they're still learning things from the report. Go back to it and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize this. I started this research. So it's a lot to ingest at first, but over time, you become an expert in your own health.
Well, I mean, the day when you've got 5 million samples in there and you've got a bunch of AI going in and figuring it all out is just game changing.
That's the next phase, right?
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So second generation nutritionist, obviously intimately, deeply familiar with the connection between food and health, and just embodying that throughout your family and your career. What prompted you to say, okay, I'm ready to go out and build a company? There was clearly a need in the market that caused you to make that leap.
Yeah, I think what it was is I believed so much in what I was seeing in terms of the genetic side of nutrition, the nutrigenomic side,
Hmm.
that I realized that this is the absolute future of nutrition as a field.
Hmm.
I don't think nutrition as a field can exist without the nutrigenomic component, without the epigenomic component, because
Yep.
all these years that I've spent looking at different diets and why one person responds great to this one, the next person responds horribly to it, and we just kind of put our hands up. We're just like,
Yep.
well, it wasn't for you.
Yep.
Now we know why it wasn't for
Yep.
you. And
Yep.
now we're bringing in this ancestral component, knowing where you're from, your migration routes over thousands of years. These are all have accumulated to essentially create you and your diet and the environment that you thrive in.
Yeah.
And when you understand that, it is game changing. It's life changing.
Yep.
To understand, okay, I'm from Northern Europe where it's colder. There was more fat. I do better on those types of diets. Had a migration route that was closer to the equator. Higher plant-based foods, more folate was required. That's what my body likes, and it
Yep.
starts to make sense.
There's such a need for this information to permeate the rest of the society. It will quickly end the futile debates out there about my diet versus your diet, which is add absolutely no value to humanity, other than just like stressing out people who get into these battles on message boards and Facebook about why this works and this doesn't. So yeah, as soon as we realize there's this whole other level that we've largely been blind to, that's going to change a lot of the conversation.
I
So
agree. Yeah.
yeah. So tell us about the entrepreneur. Tell us about starting the company. How did that work? I mean, it's non-trivial to go start a company that's going to be doing DNA analysis. Can you share a little bit about that path for the aspiring entrepreneurs out there?
Yeah, so the way Nutrition Genome actually, it actually started about 5 years ago, but I think it really took off around, I want to say it was August of 2017. And the reason was that we were using files from 23andMe. So I had created the software and we were running these separate DNA files through our software.
And there's a number of them that will look for
Number of them.
different things out there. You pump your raw data into this one, it gives you some information. You pump it into that one, it gives you some information. So you were an application kind of like riding on top of 23andMe.
Yeah, and
Cool.
the reason I had it made was to make my life easier because I was spending 8 hours per client doing these by hand because
Yeah,
I wanted
Naisha
it done
said
a
she
certain
spends
way.
5 hours per client doing this
Yeah,
stuff by hand. So it's like, how do I fix this problem so I can see more
yeah,
clients?
yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm like, this is not sustainable, and so I actually created it for my own work so I could work better,
Yeah.
and that turned into doctors asking if they could use it. They
Mhm.
started using it in their practice, and we got a great response. And what happened in August 2017 was that 23andMe removed a lot of genes
Yep.
from their file, and there were a lot of genes that we found to be important for our report.
Yeah, you needed those.
And that's when it was the exact timing. It was really funny timing that happened because my brother-in-law just came on as a partner
Hmm.
right before this happened. And we both decided to like, you know what, we need to get our own lab. We need to get our own DNA kits. We need to take control of this so we have more control over our destiny of the company.
Do you know why they did that, Alex? I mean, I know they've had legal troubles and stuff like that, but clearly it wasn't a legal reason because you're able to provide that information. So
They never released any kind of statement as to why. So I don't want to speculate.
sure,
But
that's cool. I
from
was
my
just wondering.
knowledge,
Yep.
yeah, they haven't said why they did it.
Got it. Okay, so there's a
Um,
huge need in the market then. This
yeah.
data is no longer available. It's necessary for the types of treatments you want to provide. Other clinicians want this.
Mhm.
So did you have to go raise, was this a large upfront capital to go build this? Did you have to raise money or was it something you guys were able to float?
No, we were able to float. I mean, I self-funded the software.
Yep.
I had a team, that designed it and how I
Yep.
wanted it, and so I self-funded that.
Cool.
And because our overhead was low, we were
Yep.
able to build. And
Mhm.
so ever since then, we haven't really required any capital because we're profitable and our overhead is low.
Best
Um,
kind of business, man.
Best kind of
If
business,
you don't
yeah.
need the money,
Right,
don't
right.
take it.
And we've been approached numerous times now,
Yeah.
and it feels good to kind of be in a position to say no. We're okay, but thank
Yeah.
you.
Hmm.
We're doing all right.
Yeah. Awesome,
Yeah.
man. Cool. So the other, maybe Alex, you can educate us a little bit on the test kit itself, how one would procure
Sure.
such a kit, and just a little bit about what happens after they put that sample in the mail. and the technology part of it, and then we can segue into actually looking at a sample report. If you're watching on YouTube, or if you want to go watch on YouTube, we are going to do a screen share in a few minutes here and actually look at the report. But help us understand a little bit about the process, out of the kit, a little bit about the magic that happens behind the scenes before the report is generated.
Sure. So the way we have it set up is customers simply go to nutritiongenome.com.
Here's the kit, by the way, if you're looking.
There's a DNA kit. You order it online. It's shipped to your house. It's a saliva sample, so it's a cheek swab. It takes just a few seconds. You send it back to our lab. Within about approximately 5 weeks, you'll get an email notification that your results are in. Sign into your online dashboard, and that's where you'll see the nutrition genome report. So it's 50 plus pages based on 8 different sections of health.
Yep.
And when you kind of gather that information, you have the option too, if you're seeing a practitioner or you want to find one, we have referrals on our site for different practitioners.
That's great.
You want to do a deep dive. Yeah.
Yep. So is it your lab, your scientists that do this analysis, or is it?
No. It's a separate lab that we
can sub it out. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So pretty simple. I've got the kit here. It's just a little cheek swab. You mail it in. It goes for analysis. And I've seen the PDF report. There is also a web portal. Presumably that's where a lot more information is being built and added, and education over time.
Right.
It's a lot, so you can find a qualified practitioner who can then help you start to put the pieces together. Potentially also a practitioner who can look at some of the other history on your health, and maybe start to look at some of your blood work. That's where Heads Up Health can come in. And we may do some integration work at some point down the line. But yeah, it all sounds really straightforward and simple. I'm excited to actually get my results. I've done a lot of my own trial and error stuff, quite honestly, to figure out what works. I know what blood markers I have to keep an eye on. Homocysteine is a big one for me. So there's definitely some methylation stuff going on. And I know if I'm not taking certain supplements, my homocysteine goes out of range high. And I've tested a bunch of different diets to figure out like what works best for me personally. So I've done it through trial and error, but I'm really excited to get the genetic component as well. And then I can go back to a lot of my doctor friends and pester them to help me figure out what this report means. So Naisha will get a call, and I'm sure a handful of others. So it should be fun.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the report, Alex.
Yep.
There's a green button on the Zoom screen that says share screen, just in that bottom menu bar. And again, if you want to see this on online, go ahead. We're going to put this on YouTube. Can you just maximize this window? Yep, perfect. And there we go. So now we're looking at the sample report, and take us through it.
Sure. So what we do to make this a lot easier to assimilate, not only show you how to read the report, but we actually put in information right in the beginning, the first few pages here, that gives
key takeaways.
Your key takeaways. So your entire report is put into genetic strengths, and genetic weaknesses.
Yep.
So for example, in your strengths on this sample report, it shows, this person has a better conversion of plant-based omega-3s to EPA and DHA, improved transportation of folate, vitamin D levels more likely to be in range, lower risk of iron overload. So it goes into digestion, methylation, hormones, neurotransmitters, antioxidants and inflammation, detoxification, DNA damage protection and repair, and then cardiovascular and bone health. So
Alex, are you familiar with the organic acids test?
Yes.
In the functional medicine realm? Seems like there's a lot of similar areas that are analyzed in the urine metabolites.
Yeah, that's an excellent test to take with this.
Yeah.
I think it is one of the best ones, actually, to kind of give you a great idea of, okay, this is what it says. What is, is it relevant? Is it not?
That'd be awesome, because you can then say, okay, the organics is suggesting stuff around neurotransmitter levels and methylation, and it's then corroborated by this report as well, and you just have a stronger case in terms of how you design your approach.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, looking at, different vitamins, B6, there's a gene in there that shows, if you're likely to be lower in B6, and you can test your B6 levels or look at your B6 intake.
Yeah. Awesome.
So that's all really helpful. Methylation, if you're seeing if you need, there's MTHFR, for example,
Yep.
increased need for B2 and methylfolate to kind of stabilize that gene.
I have that one there, the homocysteine one.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, the 6C677T.
Yeah. So yeah, all really important. Neurotransmitters. To me, one of the most important sections, I think, and most fascinating
Absolutely. Yep.
of this report is showing you your base level in terms of your serotonin, dopamine, glutamate, GABA. All of those. This is I've found to be so accurate in terms of understanding how you react to stress. What does your body do in those cases? How do you behaviorally act? When that happens.
Oh my goodness, this is just
Um,
incredibly powerful in terms of behavior analysis.
yeah.
Understanding, okay, there's a genetic reason why you have ADD, mental health issues,
Yeah.
and you're not. There may be other ways to attack this rather than just throwing medications at this thing. As I mentioned to you, Alex, we spoke to Carrie Brown previously, who's very open and transparent about her battle with bipolar disorder and
Mm-hmm.
the medications that she was on, how awful they were, just right on the border of being locked up, quite
Yeah.
honestly. And it was finding her genetic data that
Mm-hmm.
that set her free.
Yeah.
And one of the comments she made at the end of the show is how many people are in institutions and jails
Mm-hmm.
because they have a treatable mental disorder that can easily be identified with a simple test.
I completely agree. And the glutamate and GABA and the dopamine genes, I mean, they have been profound in terms of understanding mental health, in my opinion. When you start to look at these patterns in people and what they experience, like, for example, glutamate, is excitatory, GABA is calming.
Mm-hmm.
And there are an umbrella of disorders that are connected to glutamate imbalances.
Yep.
And so you start to look at bipolar, you start to look at, even like OCD, certain things where there's these neurodegenerative, so Alzheimer's, Parkinson's,
Yep.
Even MS, they all have this kind of this glutamate component to them.
Yep.
And you look at dopamine. So you go too high and too low. With glutamate, you go too high, it's really excitatory, too low, full on depression.
Yep.
And you see these nutritional cofactors that are involved in making sure that these are all modulated.
Yep.
And toxicity and deficiency play an enormous role in understanding why these are flipping around. Mm-hmm. And when you target which ones they are, you start to understand it.
So, Alex, you mentioned that there are practitioners available to help people. And
Right.
I'm assuming that the practitioners are qualified enough to look at this data and start to make the conclusions, if you will, around how it maps back to things like mental health disorders. I mean, that's no joke when you start getting into that stuff. And so people can get access to practitioners to help them through this as well.
Yeah. So the list of practitioners we have now, they've all been vetted. These are people I've all talked to.
And are they organized by discipline? Like I'm a mental health expert, I'm a nutritional expert, or is it kind of across the board in terms of the practitioners you've selected?
It's across the board. That's where we like to go, is to not only have it more narrowed down, but also have one in every city and state, because a lot of practitioners can only practice in their state.
Yep.
And we actually have a test coming out, an exam that kind of goes really far in depth on this whole report, so that the practitioners can take that exam before we list them on the site.
That's cool. Certification program of some kind.
Not like, we're certifying them, but that they've actually gone through it and that we approve, that this
I understand. Okay, cool. Yep.
So this next section here is your personalized DNA based on your results.
Grocery list. I love it.
Yeah. So these are the foods that have come up based on your genetic combinations.
Yep.
Where you see a higher need for certain foods. And so when you start looking at these, you can kind of start to see and match up patterns, essentially.
That makes sense. Yep.
And you'll start to really see that, okay, I have a really high need for folate, for example.
Yeah.
And these are the foods I need to be focusing on, because folate is a spectrum. There are multiple types of folate in food.
Yep.
And so you can't just isolate it.
Or you can't just take one supplement. Maybe you can, but if you can get it in its natural package, there's so many other benefits to that. Yeah.
Like beets are an excellent example of just a powerhouse, because not only do they have methylfolate, they have betaine, which is, a backup to choline, which helps the homocysteine cycle. And then it has these beneficial compounds for nitric oxide.
Yep.
So it's just, so you just can't beat food.
And there's B12, right? That's something I have to focus on. And there it is. Pastured eggs, which I
Mm-hmm.
buy. They're expensive, but I buy them. It's like $9 a dozen.
Yeah.
Grass-fed meat, which I buy, and wild salmon. Those are all things on my list. So again, this just kind of distills it down. You can go look at the report and say, okay, here's the foods that I can choose. And if a certain food doesn't align with your particular diet or lifestyle, there's lots of other choices here.
Exactly.
In that same category.
Yeah. And so as you're reading through your report, you'll see these kind of pop up and highlighted, and you'll start to see, okay, is this truly really relevant for me?
Yep.
And you do start to see those patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Same is true of the foods, drinks, toxins, additives to minimize or avoid. Now, depending on your level of education on nutrition, some of these may be like, well, of course, you're supposed to avoid these things.
Mm-hmm.
But some people, aren't really aware of how damaging this may be for them.
Yep.
So when you start looking at things, that cause DNA damage. So if there's cancer that runs in the family, certain things that cause DNA damage may be more damaging to you.
Yep.
Than it may be for the next person.
So binge drinking and smoking are out. That's unfortunate.
Those are out.
Yes.
Yeah. Can't get away with those.
Yep. Sadly, folks.
Sadly. But there's certain things like processed meats, and we see the research on that in colon cancer. Well, there are certain people that are much more prone to that, leading to colon cancer.
Yep.
Possibility. So what I found when I worked with clients is that this really kind of hit them in the forehead and said, oh, wow, it shows here that I should really avoid these things, versus when you kind of give these general recommendations to people, they're kind of like, yeah, I know. I need to eat broccoli.
Yeah.
I shouldn't eat so much, cured meats.
Makes it much more tangible.
Much more tangible. You're like, okay, this is specific to me. And that's why I think this is so key for the nutrition field, because now you're finally customizing it to the individual.
And this is bringing in your decades of experience working with thousands and thousands of people, and then also looking at thousands of genetic tests, and it's the culmination of all of that work, I think, that comes into this, which is wonderful.
It is, yeah. We're bringing both the clinical and then all the published research together. So everything in the Nutrition Genome Report is from published research.
That's why I love talking to Naisha, because she just gets in there and tells you how to do things. And she's like, I've looked at 10,000 sets of labs, maybe 20,000 sets of labs. And you just don't argue with that. There's all of these squabbles online about how to do keto right or wrong. And it's like, listen, dude, I've worked with 10,000 people, looked at 50,000 labs.
Yeah.
And that's where you really get stuff that is like cutting through the noise.
Yeah. And I think that's why we've worked so well together, because we both kind of have that same
You're both
mindset.
the same way. Well, you both have similar backgrounds, where just taking decades of clinical experience and then bringing solutions to market that are tried and tested in the trenches and retested in the trenches, and then remapped against the latest technology, the latest research, the latest findings. It's incredible.
Yeah. This next section here, your personalized blood work. So again, this is triggered from gene combinations. So it's not saying that you're going to be out of range, but that it may be of interest to you, may be interest to your doctor. And I found these to be consistently accurate. Again, looking over it, before we even put this to market, I was cross-referencing thousands of clients with their genetics and their blood work to say, is this true? And these are the things that we realized are true.
Well, if I'm waxing philosophical here for a moment, Alex, I think the potential for Heads Up Health, which is pulling in the data from all of these different EMR systems, cleaning it up, normalizing it, so people have all of their blood work. And if there was ever opportunities for us to start cross-referencing things, that would, I think, be just incredibly exciting, because we want to bring the blood test component to the table. We also want to bring the lifestyle component to the table: heart rate variability, sleep quality, blood sugar, all of those things. So when our databases have a baby together, it's going to be a really, really beautiful baby.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, what I'm so excited about is I want to push this field to the epigenomic realm. And essentially that requires everybody talking to each other. So we really get somewhere with this information, because it's truly fascinating information.
Cool. So other things you want to touch on here, Alex, in the report?
So let me I'm going to scroll down to the mental health section. So you can
this is huge. It's just, incredibly prevalent right now in the discussions around what's just current in modern world. And we just had a really, really powerful guest on the show who talked a lot about how to become your own detective and how to start working on this stuff. So it's very relevant. I'd love to segue into the mental health stuff here.
Yeah, let's take a look. So here's what the table looks like as it's generated. So
yep.
You see normal, heterozygous, homozygous. For those who don't know, normal is also called the wild type. It's the most common genotype in the current studied population. Heterozygous variant means you have one variant from one parent. Mm-hmm. Homozygous means you have a variant from each parent. Typically, homozygous variants are more relevant in terms of changing the gene function.
Yep.
But the normal or wild type doesn't always mean a better genotype. It's not about better or worse. A lot of these are trade-offs.
Yep.
And you understand how they work. It's not just, wow, I have this negative mutation. Well, if you understand why there is a variant or mutation, there's often a trade-off that's doing a positive and a negative. And that's from years or thousands of years of adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at, for example, ANKK1, COMT. So both of these have to do with dopamine. First one has to do with dopamine receptors. Second one has to do with the actual gene involved in breaking down dopamine and adrenaline. It's also the estrogen pathway. So if we look at these, we're thinking, okay, this person has a heterozygous gene here and 3 heterozygous genes in COMT. There's going to be definitely a connection to this person for dopamine. And so as we scroll down, we start to look at, okay, dopamine receptors. Here's what improves gene function, and here's what decreases gene function.
Meditation, balanced blood sugar, sufficient vitamin D levels, omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, high intensity exercise, low media exposure. All good stuff to me, man.
Yeah, so what's really fascinating about this one is dopamine receptor density is linked to things like sugar addictions, compulsive eating, obesity. All of these are linked to these having lower density of dopamine receptors. And essentially what they found in research is a lot of times these people don't learn as easily from their mistakes.
Yep.
And so ADHD, ADD are also connected to dopamine receptors.
Mm-hmm.
And when you can look at that and say, okay, how do we improve this gene if we have a variant here that are likely to have lower density of dopamine receptors? So yeah, you look at their vitamin D, you make sure they're eating balanced meals. They're not just living on carbohydrates.
Well, yeah, you look at all these people who probably have low density dopamine receptors, and then the food that we're eating is a train wreck.
Yeah.
Blood sugar is going through the freaking roof. So you just basically pour gas on that fire. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's where this stuff becomes so helpful to see.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You see, okay, we know, do they have high copper levels? So their omega-3 is too low.
Yeah.
Iron deficiency, all of those, you start to see their behavior and you start to see the connection, and then you correct.
Awesome.
COMT. So this is a very, it's up there with MTHFR in terms of popularity of understanding, hearing about it. And COMT essentially is the pathway that breaks down catecholamines. So that would be coffee, that'd be wine, black tea, green tea. Now, why are certain people more sensitive to coffee or caffeinated drinks or these drinks with catecholamines? It slows down this gene. So, for example, if you're stressed, that's slowing down this gene that's building up your adrenaline and your dopamine, right? You're in a heightened state. Now, when you drink coffee, that slows that state even more, creating more circulating dopamine, more circulating adrenaline.
More anxiety,
right? More
yep.
just kind of a feeling of panic.
Yeah.
And magnesium and vitamin C are the cofactors. They both modulate those. So what you can have if this deficiency of the two and a toxicity, which those two deficiencies are actually very common. Magnesium is a very common deficiency.
Yep.
And then you have this kind of heightened state of mind with, eating a certain way or drinking a lot of coffee, that just kind of spins you out. And the people who get stressed and get angry, they have that kind of anger response. That's a COMT response. That's COMT going too slow. My dopamine, adrenaline's out of control. Yep. You get angry, you get irritable.
So you're like, okay, this explains it. This is why I don't break down these catecholamines fast enough. Okay, it's right here. Here's the genetic traits. It's been surfaced in the report. Here's some of the things I can do to offset that.
Exactly. Now, the next one, really fascinating, glutamate to GABA conversion. Mm-hmm. And this one in particular is what I feel like really kind of paved the way for everything else in this report. This was one of my first findings in terms of understanding patterns in families. When I started seeing heart attacks, ADHD, OCD, Alzheimer's in the same family, I'm like, these are all connected. How are they all connected? They were all connected from glutamate.
So different conditions, but you're seeing this cluster of conditions within a family, and you're like, there's got to be a common link there. Is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, and so you'll see down below, and a few paragraphs down, all these neurodegenerative disorders. They're all connected to these kind of glutamate GABA imbalances. And so when you talk to people and you say, they say my mind won't shut off at night, that's glutamate imbalance. Caffeine actually inhibits GABA and increases glutamate. That's what you're feeling. You're feeling a high. In the right amounts, it helps cognitive function, but too much, it's very damaging.
I've been pounding a dark roast Starbucks here throughout the entire conversation. So.
Well, maybe you can handle it.
Yeah.
But this one, I think, again, this is B6 and magnesium are those nutritional cofactors. So 22% of all enzymes in your body require a nutritional cofactor.
Yep.
And if B6 is too low, magnesium is too low, that glutamate's staying high for too long. And now if glutamate is plummeting, you're going to get depression. If it's spiking, you're going to get mania.
Mm-hmm.
And, people feel different levels of that. And some people feel much higher levels of each one. And we can start to look at these pathways, these glutamate GABA pathways as a great clue.
So beautiful. I'm just already, my mind just is constantly just saying, okay, now how do I take this data and how do I go get my blood work at LabCorp? How do I take these recommendations, start to put the pieces together for myself? That's becoming your own detective. Some people hate the word biohacking, whatever you want to call it. I don't care. You can start to go do this and start to put these pieces together. That's what Carrie Brown did. She's like, okay, I went and figured all this stuff out for myself. She did have a practitioner who was working with her, which is incredible. But yeah, the correlation with the lab tests, like you said, to know if the interventions are causing the epigenetic switches to move in a favorable direction. That's what I just get excited about, correlating this data with the lab test results.
Well, what's fascinating too is you can start to look at exercise in terms of, people a lot of times ask, is there a genetic part of what exercise is best for me?
Yeah.
And I kind of say, well, it's really not, you're genetically wired to be just this way, but I think different types of exercise influence your body in different ways. Yeah. And so for mental health, for example, glutamate is a great example. I've always consistently saw people who had these kind of really high glutamate levels that are attracted to endurance exercise or running.
Yeah.
And you start to look at the literature and you realize that helps drain that glutamate from the brain and use it as fuel.
Oh, Jesus, man. You start to figure out why you've become the person you are. And it's this underlying trait.
Right. And dopamine, adrenaline people, they'd like to do things at a little more high intensity because it's an adrenaline response. It's something fast. Maybe it's MMA. Yeah. Maybe it's weightlifting. But you'll start to see these kind of why are you attracted to this type of exercise?
That's so cool.
Yeah. So very fascinating information, really helpful if you're lost trying to figure out, why do I have these mood swings? Why do I feel this way?
Yep.
You start to make sense of it, which puts you in the driver's seat now. It's no longer
incredible. This is not an expensive test as well, Alex. So what does the test cost?
It's $299.
Yeah, it says
good investment.
Absolutely, good investment.
Yeah.
Cool.
And the rest of the report, essentially you're looking at inflammation, antioxidant protection.
Yep.
So, this is really important for those people who may be more sensitive to chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
We start to see that with lung health and people who are more sensitive, why do certain smokers get cancer? Others don't.
Yep.
Start to see it's, it's potentially connected to glutathione levels.
Yep.
So we look at genes with glutathione, superoxide dismutase catalase.
Yeah, so if you're not producing enough glutathione because of some genetic mutation and you're a smoker, you're at higher risk than someone who just is genetically fortunate to be like a glutathione producing machine.
Exactly. And what we know is that the people who live the longest have the highest glutathione.
Yep.
And we know that environmental toxins, stress, all deplete glutathione. So you can start to look at, again, narrow down, where do I need to focus and then where do I need to improve? So if your glutathione needs to be lifted, there are a lot of ways you can do that.
Awesome.
And you can test. There's a lot of tests you can do to kind of help narrow that down.
Yep. Wow. This is incredible stuff, man. So why don't we, how how are we doing for time here? Let's. I want to be mindful of your time, Alex.
Yeah, I'm not really sure actually.
It's we've got about 5 or 10 minutes here.
Okay.
Why don't we segue a little bit? I know you've talked a lot about mental health, but some of the biggest applications that you see out there. I mean, mental health being a huge one. I know Dr. Winters uses this when she is designing her nutritional interventions for cancer treatment.
Hmm.
So take us through some of the. There's obviously any number of directions this can go, but if you had to bucket some of the top applications and where this can be incredibly helpful, especially for people who are listening and
Yeah.
maybe on a path where they're trying to work things out on their own. They may be working with some functional, some conventional, and
Yeah.
haven't quite gotten there yet. They're still not getting better. So if you had to bucket like the top 3 or 4 areas where there's just profound success or um, top applications, where might you start?
I think that would be the digestion section um, first, because you can start to see different macronutrient profiles in terms of this person's going to do well on a higher fat. This person is going to do more poorly on a higher
Yep.
fat diet, or fasting in general.
Yep.
Certain types of saturated fats are going to be possibly more sensitive to.
Yep.
So you start to you start to really put together their base macronutrient profile.
And
And
and,
then
di- and gut health and digestion arguably
uh
is at the root of everything. So
everything,
yeah.
everything. And there's that huge gut mental brain, mental health connection.
Yep.
So you always start with digestion, getting that really, dialed in. And then I would say the methylation section, combined with the
Huge.
neurotransmitter
Yeah. Methylation.
section is
Yeah.
so important. The methylation, I mean, this section here is, if you were to look at the base of understanding epigenetic switches, it's really at methylation.
Yep.
And so you're looking at folate, choline, B12, B6, and B2, and betaine. Essentially, those are the big ones that have the biggest influence on those switches.
Yep.
And so when you can kind of dial that in, you start to make a lot of sense of things that are going on.
Yep.
And then, of course,
this is not only for people who are sick. I mean, this is disease prevention, and this is quality of life that can help you avoid even getting in a situation where you have to use this to fix an issue.
Yeah, I mean, that really is how it also kind of started. Is I started to want to look at these family patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And before, what people were told is, well, it's genetic. You can't really do much about that. You have heart disease in your family, you have diabetes. And I just never agreed with that.
Mm-hmm.
And what this told me, like when I had this done for my whole family, or my wife's family even, is I wanted to look at patterns, and I wanted to say, how can we prevent these patterns from occurring anymore? And then how can we influence the next 4 generations?
Yep.
Because that's what epigenetics does. How you live your life, what you do, will influence the next 4 generations.
Yeah.
And that's powerful.
Yeah.
And so that's really where you start to take more ownership and responsibility for what you're doing with yourself, because essentially your kids are going to be influenced by that.
Alex, is any of this covered by insurance? Probably not, but that would be one question. Are you starting to see any adoption of this within the conventional medicine realms, or is it primarily in the functional realms right now?
I think it's starting to break into the conventional realms. It's fairly new. It's a new
Yep.
field, and as you know, that takes a while to
Sure.
get into the conventional realm.
The schools and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, but the reception from MDs has been overwhelmingly positive.
Awesome.
Which is, to me, exciting. And
Yep.
the NDs, functional medicine practitioners, they've been on this for a few years.
Yep.
But they're starting to see that this really is the future.
Yep.
In terms of taking it to that next level. And I think when they can start to do that with, even the medications that are being used, that they start doing genetic testing before they give these medications, understanding how somebody is going to react,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to save, I think, a lot of lives too.
Wow. Amazing. All right, Alex. Well, this has been incredible. I think we can keep it very succinct here, and I think we've covered everything I was hoping to do in terms of getting this introduced to the Heads Up Health community. So, thank you for your incredible work that you're doing. First and foremost, I'm very excited about the potential for our companies to partner we in whatever capacity that ends up being. So looking forward to those discussions, and I want to make sure that everybody at Heads Up Health, who's one of our users, gets this information, understands how to use this information in terms of becoming an empowered patient. So we'll be really excited to help promote the great work you're doing. So
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for your time. I'll get you back to your day. It's been a great pleasure having you. Thanks, Alex.
Oh, you bet. Thank you.
Yep.